Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia.
This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
Hello. Well,
Hello there.
hi. Here we are.
Well, not much has changed since we last recorded.
The world hasn't ended or anything. No.
Let's start with an important note.
What's that?
We saw Taylor Swift
We did.
at the Eras Tour,
Mm-hmm.
which was life-changing.
You became Concert Katie.
I did.
Katie has two versions. It's like Jekyll and Hyde, but both of them are nice. So it's not.
Thanks.
But she is Katie, and there's also Concert Katie.
Which is a separate happier me.
Separate entity altogether.
So we saw Taylor Swift a few days before the election, and I think that serotonin carried me through for some time.
It carried me through until 2 a.m.
Wednesday morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So it did a really good job.
Yeah.
But I will say, I know that the Eras Tour is about over, but holy cow, wow.
Yeah, it's
We
a
had a
good
great
show.
Just incredible.
I'm impressed by the stamina of any musician who can do a 3.5 hour show. That's just a long time.
Yeah. We went with a couple of our friends, and we were joking the next morning about why did we think we had to perform the show with Taylor Swift, like, in our seats? Because we were all in really sad shape Sunday morning when we had to drive back to Ohio.
Standing on concrete made me remember that I'm in my 30s now.
I know.
Yeah.
That changes things.
Yeah.
It was rare, and we were there. It was awesome.
It was very cool. Here's another positive note.
Yeah.
We're doing some travel coming up, and
We
might
are.
see some of you. We're going to NCTE, the
Yeah.
National Council for Teachers of English
Yes.
conference up in Boston.
Yeah, we'll be in Boston.
This is going to release, I think, the morning that we're flying
Yes.
there.
So if you happen to listen to this the day it comes out, and you are in or around Boston or will be at NCTE, email us.
Just yell at us across the conference room.
Email us at hello@16to1.com and tell us if you're there. We would love to gather. Also, if you have any good recommendations for Boston, Salem, let us know. We're trying to finalize some important dinner plans. As
You and Allison are going in your capacities as teachers. I am going in my capacity as researcher. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be
We're
gonna be
excited.
fun.
I've only been to NCTE once before, and it was in Baltimore. It's a really great few days. It is very grounding, and it feels good to be around other educators in the trenches with you, which is what that community brings.
Yeah.
And I'll have a chance to meet with some partners that we work with at the school and catch up with some people from United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And so just checking off all kinds of boxes here.
Cool.
Just catching up with people. It'll be nice.
Neat. If you're going to be in Boston, we'll see you there in just a few hours, potentially.
Yeah.
The other thing is just a quick announcement. We'd like to remind everybody to sign up for the 16 to 1 podcast email newsletter. It's where you can get latest updates, episode announcements, resources, workshop offerings, everything like that from Moonbeam Multimedia. That is us. Also, we're going to stick all of our sources for the show notes this episode. We do this for every episode on our website. You can find those at 16to1.com/archives. Also, if there's a story in your local educational community that you would like us to cover, please do reach out. We would love to hear from you and hear about those stories. You can contact us on our website, contact form, or write at hello@16to1.com.
So this episode, once we jump in here, is going to be an election debrief. But before we do that, just really quickly, if you did not listen to our most recent episode, it features the 2020 Nebraska Teacher of the Year, Megan Helberg, who is my mentor that I met while I am completing my fellowship at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. I had so many people tell me how great that episode was. Just friends who don't even know Megan personally, and it was just really wonderful to get to talk to her. If you haven't listened, it's probably my favorite episode up until this point. I just really appreciated her candidness in talking about making where you are, where you want to be. And I just appreciate that she showed up for us. So if you haven't listened, our most recent episode was an interview with our friend, Megan Helberg.
Yeah. I was pretty grateful that we had a pre-recorded episode to air last week, especially one that was stressing the importance of connection and community, and especially in times of heightened political and civil unrest. I was doing the final edits for that show on Election Day, and it was helping me get through what I was feeling that day. So a great conversation with Megan.
She's a good egg.
Yes, definitely. Getting into this week, we felt like we needed to allow ourselves a moment of reckoning with some of the possibilities that are on the table for U.S. educators and learners during the next 4 years and beyond. We just want to try to lay out facts that we have available concerning the incoming administration's education-related priorities and discuss some of the possible or likely changes that might be on the table. As we talk through it, we'll discover that maybe some of this isn't going to be quite as easy to accomplish as one might think, but we'll discuss the possibilities and we'll go from there. So the big question here is, what could a second Trump administration mean for teachers and students across the country?
Yeah.
To start with here is a conversation around the Department of Education, which the Trump platform has sort of advocated eliminating. I just wanted to start and look at the Department of Education and what it does, because I don't think that most people most of the time are thinking about, hey, what happens if this cabinet level department doesn't exist anymore? I got some facts and figures here. This is the most recent data I could find. This is according to the Education Data Initiative. And they said that in 2024, the federal government's providing about 13.6% of the funding for public K-12 schools. The actual percentage varies by state. And that's actually increased since we talked about this in our funding episode a couple of years ago. It's gone up over the last couple of years. Some of that's from COVID relief funding. Some of that's from other designations. So federal funding in the U.S. supports all of these following programs and initiatives: early childhood learning programs like Head Start and preschools, Title I funding for improved student outcomes in low-income areas, Pell Grants, federal work-study programs, teacher education and professional development programs, civil rights enforcement programs, disability employment and workforce rehab programs, grants for historically Black colleges and universities and predominantly Black institutions, international and foreign language education, veterans, Hispanic students, individuals with disabilities, migrants, economically disadvantaged students, and grants for schools in rural and insular areas, as well as school improvement grants. That is what we're talking about potentially eliminating or shifting to other departments. That's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot to be pulling the puppet strings up.
Yep. There's also testing and reporting and compliance and all kinds of mechanisms to make sure that schools that receive federal funding are serving all students well. So there's a lot more than what I just outlined, but those are some of the programs that could be impacted by this. Trump's also expressed support for universal school choice programs. We were talking about with the expansion of voucher programs here in Ohio. The Trump administration is interested in universal school choice for everyone. Another thing he's expressed support for is publicly elected school principals, which
Well,
you can show up and have a say in your school leadership right now.
We have school boards, and those are publicly elected people.
Yeah.
And so you do have these in your community. So don't hear these things and think that you have no voice or say in what happens in your local schools, because you certainly can and do. You do have a voice.
Effective activism requires more than simply a social media component. And I think that we have lost track of that a little bit. So anyway.
And if you're not sure where to start, reach out to your local administrators, or to maybe even, if your kids are in school, to their teachers, like something like that. Like, make connections in the community with these stakeholders. Another possibility under the new Trump presidency is merging education and labor departments.
Yeah.
Which is something that Trump proposed back in 2018.
Yeah, and we've done it here in Ohio, and I'd forgotten that this was a 2018 Trump proposal. The Ohio Department of Education and Workforce.
And Workforce, yes.
Yeah, I think that merging those two departments is an indicator of like a particular worldview, and that's that education is exclusively concerned with preparation to enter a workforce. I know that we've talked about that a lot, but I personally happen to believe that education should be a preparation for full participation in the entire human experience. So not just the workforce. School is about how to be a capable and curious and contributing member of the human species. And education and labor are both very important components to the flourishing of this country, but we can't chain education to the service of labor, because I think that's how we lose track of like innovation and competition and creativity and all of these things. Last night I heard some sort of interview. Mark Zuckerberg was talking about how he wants employees that are really good at doing one thing. He doesn't care about a well-rounded human being in his workforce. He cares about somebody who can like basically execute as a cog in the machine one specific task very well. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, well, that's why Facebook is ruining the world. That kind of worker can be myopic.
Instead of trying to find someone who has an entire set of skills similar to that of someone who's more well-rounded.
Yep. So anyway, that was disappointing to hear. I hope Mark Zuckerberg someday changes his mind about what makes a good employee. Would you like to tell us a little bit about student loan repayments and what a Trump 2.0 might mean for that?
Okay, so here in Ohio, about 15% of the population has student loan debt, with about $35,000 in debt per borrower on average. President Biden campaigned on a promise to cancel at minimum $10,000 per person in federal student loan debt, which is a promise that remains mostly unfulfilled still. Because most of his loan initiatives have become entangled in court challenges, this still remains unfulfilled, as I said, and this is because of his high-level strategy, which was to use rulemaking in existing federal programs to relieve the debt. So, still, debt relief for student borrowers remains in limbo, and it seems likely that Trump's second administration would discontinue that Biden's loan forgiveness initiatives. And then for that reason, then loan repayments will likely resume for many borrowers, but it's really hard to say exactly how many that could be. There are some programs that might be safer, like the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which Trump did try but fail to eliminate during his first term. But now that Republicans are in control of both the House and the Senate, we might see some more aggressive attempts along lines like that. There's also a thought that Trump could also roll back consumer protection for students, hoping to avoid predatory for-profit colleges and universities.
Yeah, I wonder why the founder of a now defunct unaccredited for-profit real estate education program that the editors of the conservative editorial magazine, The National Review, by the way, saw fit to characterize as a massive scam.
All of that to say, it seems likely that there will not be sweeping debt relief.
We have a bunch of protections against discrimination, like sex-based discrimination and student safety initiatives for queer and trans students. We're probably going to see a rollback of a lot of those. Biden made some updates to Title IX. That was pretty recently, I think, that it was designed to protect transgender youth and other LGBTQ students. Also, we just went through an election cycle with ads openly portraying transgender people as an enemy and a threat to society. And
it's worth mentioning that every educator, we all have the same one thing to say about this, which is that this is not about an ideology. Students are not being taught to question themselves and their sexual identities.
Yeah.
This is a part of growing up, but it is not being taught in schools to wonder.
Yeah, the thing I wanted to say about this is that being queer is an experience, and young people, students in this country, have it. Whether or not you personally want to go through the experience is materially irrelevant to the lives of trans and queer youth. And policies and laws that cause us to confuse experiences that people have with ideologies can and do cause harm, and they impact the mental, emotional, and physical well-being of students. I am very worried about this one. I'm worried about student health and well-being. The way that these things are experienced by young queer students is devastating. We're essentially sanctioning bullying at a national scale. Teachers are going to have to be vigilant and mindful that this is going on in the lives of some of their students and that their students are experiencing a really difficult environment. So anyway, we're going to probably see, like I said, some of those protections, Biden-era protections, rolled back, especially the Title IX changes. Teachers unions. Project 2025 supports ending collective bargaining for public sector workers generally. So teachers' unions, no more.
Yep.
Is the goal.
Seemingly.
And then we have a lot of questions about freedom of expression, book bannings, that kind of thing. Do you want to take us through some of that?
Sure. Recent reporting from The Guardian finally put a price tag on something that you and I have talked about a few times on the podcast. And that's the cost to the U.S. taxpayers that's absorbed by schools in the fight against mis and disinformation. We talked about this at great length, actually, in an episode recently, talking about just how much time and effort is spent dealing with mis and disinformation, either intentionally or unintentionally, in schools. But this article from The Guardian states that it cost $3.2 billion during the 23-24 school year.
$3.2 billion?
Yes.
Okay.
Eaten up by legal consultations, security guards, staff turnover costs, PR, communication consulting costs, and then just also the actual man hours, the staff time responding to these incidents.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with everything from just incorrect information to threats to safety, like bomb threats. And
it's expensive.
Yes. An exorbitant amount of taxpayer money that is going toward this stuff.
The other thing that I try to put into context here is that we're talking about schools of all different sizes who are being consumed by this type of work, which means that in a school like mine, I have 2 administrators. They might both be busy with one incident. If you're talking about big schools, we're talking handfuls of administrators and buildings. And so you can see how quickly this can affect a school given the population. Because like for us, when we have a big incident, there goes both of our administrators who might be inaccessible to us for a day. So
I mean, I've watched you be frustrated that you can't reach your administrators because they are tied up dealing with something like this.
They might be in court. They might be whatever. And so it's hard to operate without them. And it's especially frustrating to know that we shouldn't have to be. That's where these costs kind of add up, also in ways that you can't even put a number on. And it also just puts schools in difficult positions. There will be a Secretary of Education chosen soon.
Yeah. I was wondering whether they might not pick it before we got this recorded. But
I kind of was also wondering if we wouldn't know. So as of right now, Trump has not announced who will be the Secretary of Education. There are a few names being tossed around. I mean, we did a whole episode on Betsy DeVos back when it was her.
We did. She's one of the contenders.
We famously said bye-bye, Betsy, I think was that episode title. And so if she returns, I'm going to have to welcome her and her yacht back. I don't know.
Betsy.
I'm going to have to welcome back Betsy and her yacht. And I'll just flip the image of the yacht returning instead of leaving. So she's in the news as a possibility.
Yes. She has been making a lot of noise because she is a big school choice champion.
I wish she would stay in Michigan.
She also supports...
Isn't she Michigan?
I think so. She also supports eliminating the Department of Education. Although I think all of these people have expressed support for that. Okay, DeVos.
Another fella here in our list of possibilities. We've talked about also Ryan Walters of Oklahoma. He's their state superintendent. This is the guy that wanted to make the leather-bound classroom Bible with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Declaration of Independence.
Sorry.
Well, maybe they've updated the edition to include the Bill of Rights, but probably not.
Can't even imagine that. So these are just 2 of the names. Another name that's being chucked around the news is Tiffany Justice. She's a co-founder for Moms for Liberty, and they're a far-right activist group. So you can see how all of these people bring some unique situations to this position, and how this could have some pretty intense effects on freedom of expression, maybe book bannings, things like that.
Yeah.
So, no clear choice at the moment.
No.
For recording this in mid-November, but...
Yeah, people who are willing to be enthusiastic supporters of his message is how I would describe this. So I really don't think anybody knows, but people are pointing to people like Tiffany Justice and Ryan Walters because they have so recently made stinks
in the news
in support of some of these initiatives and whatnot. So anyway, I'm very curious to see who that nominee is going to be.
So how likely are these changes to the Department of Ed, would you say right now?
I had to do some research to calm myself down here because my very first thought was eliminating the Department of Ed was basically that, like, between 1 and 2 in 10 of my friends is going to be looking for a job, because almost all of my friends are educators, and even many of them work in programs like special ed programs, or like they're aides or something like that. Many of the people that I personally know who work in schools work in a program funded federally somehow, at least partially.
And especially with us living and working where I do in Ohio, we have lots of Title I grants. We receive lots of grants for being Southeast Appalachia, and so lots of these positions are made possible because of those factors.
And that's actually something that the analysts, the political analysts, have been talking about. They're like, well, some of these changes that are being proposed would hit hardest in the areas of strong Trump support. And therefore, they might not end up happening because they would be unpopular. But I also am not really sure. I'm not really sure that that's enough of a reason to stop Trump from making changes that he wants to make, because at this point, he's not going to be running for office again.
This is it.
It's really kind of setting up for the Vance agenda. In some ways, the brakes are sort of off.
I also think that many of these things, if we are cutting support especially, are going to hit places like Ohio even harder, which is what you just said. And so when we are already in a teacher shortage, it's only going to become worse.
Yeah.
It would not surprise me that in the next 10 years that there are consolidations of public schools.
Let's talk, though, about how possible it is, even in the first place, to, for example, eliminate the Department of Ed. The Department of Education was created through an act of Congress.
We talked about this.
We did. It was the Department of Education Organization Act of 1979. It split off education from health, and then Health and Human Services got its name, I think, around the same time. So anyway, as a cabinet-level federal agency established by law, it can only be eliminated through new legislation, has to be passed by both houses of Congress and signed by the president. The department's functions, programs, and funding are established through all kinds of federal laws, and all of those would somehow also need to be repealed or significantly modified. We've got all these major programs, some of which we've hit on, like federal student aid, education research, civil rights enforcement. All of that would need to be either eliminated or reassigned to other agencies. So a president can't unilaterally eliminate a federal department through executive action alone, though we also hinted above there are a lot of student protections programs currently in place that can be rolled back with executive action. Immediate term, we might see an impact in student loan repayments. We might see an impact in protections for queer students, but I think it's going to be a longer term effort. I'm honestly not sure that congressional support at the level needed could be organized in a 4-year period for this kind of change. I don't know if Congress can come together to do the work to replace whatever is currently in law with regard to this department with something else.
I agree.
There's cause for concern if you work in education, but I also think that it's maybe going to be a little slower of a rollout on some of these more aggressive proposals.
I agree with that. I wake up every day and I'm a really proud public educator, and I'm going to wake up tomorrow and still be a proud public educator. Not to toot my own horn, but I think that the work that I do is really important, and I'm going to keep doing it.
Proud of you.
As long as there are kids in my room, we're going to keep doing it.
As long as kids keep showing up to learn.
I'm going to make those connections. I'm going to do my best. I'm getting tired, but I still love being a public educator. I still love it.
On a positive note, I wanted to draw attention to some state and local election results that sounded like a breath of fresh air. There's a ProPublica report on the 2024 general election, and we'll put that report in the show notes. It shows that despite Trump's win, there were significant numbers of Americans who turned out to the polls to reject school voucher programs. The report calls out initiatives in Kentucky, Nebraska, and Colorado, among others, all of which included school choice measures, and all of which failed by significant margins. Despite what school choice advocates may suggest, it seems like voucher programs are just not popular with voters.
And one last positive thing for the state of Ohio.
Yes.
Mostly good news, I should say, for Ohio readers is that in Ohio, Voters approved all but 2 of the 28 public library levies on the ballot across the state.
Yes.
That's so great.
Yes, 26 and 28.
I love 100%, but I'm really happy with 26 and 28. I think this tells us something very interesting. In this case about Ohio. And in this case about Kentucky, Nebraska, and Colorado as well. Other thoughts about this?
I'll armchair quarterback this election result. People actually do support public programming.
Mhm.
People do support public schools and public libraries.
Mhm.
They support taxpayer-funded initiatives to make us better and more informed. People do care about those things. I think the amygdala is in the driver's seat in that the economy is in a very precarious situation. If you look at the average American consumer household, it's very similar to 2016 in my mind, the results of this. I think people received COVID stimulus money. A couple $1,000s in COVID relief ended up being life-changing money. And I think that people got that, associated it with rosier times, with
fondly.
Yeah. They're like, my life was materially easier in this many ways. I'm going to continue to be grappling with these election results for a while. I'm a strong supporter of public schools. I'm a product of public schools. I support teachers and I support learning and curiosity. And we need public education because every other kind of education seeks to exclude somebody for some reason. Whether it's money or you don't participate in the religion of this school, whatever it may be, every other kind of education is exclusionary. But learning and curiosity and literacy and a framework and a training for continuous self-improvement, that should be something that is available to everybody, all humans, for the benefit of all humans.
I like it.
Fill in the blank.
This is the part of the episode where we ask you a question. You send us an email, hello@16to1.com. You answer our question.
Yes.
Either correctly or incorrectly, you receive stickers. We have to go back actually 2 episodes ago because we did not do a fill in the blank with Megan. So from 2 episodes ago, here was the question.
Recently, in our part of the country, a comet was visible with the naked eye each night the first 45 minutes after sunset. The name of that comet was C2023A3, also known as Suchachan Atlas. This comet was discovered in 2023, but when was the last time it was visible in the night sky? That was 80,000 years ago.
Isn't that crazy? They can do that math.
80,000.
It's so crazy to me. They can do that math.
I used to do that math in college. We would calculate orbits. I remember we had a researcher come in. He was doing some calculations, some like astronomical calculations. And he was like, I think that if my calculations are right, we should see this thing in the sky at this time. Could you show me like 168,000 BC or something? And he came in and looked at it and it was there. But he'd done all the calculations by hand. And then the software showed it in the sky. So anyway, yes, this is very cool. And I like that. 80,000 years ago is when that comet appeared before. Okay, so what's this week's question?
So November is Native American History Month. And recently the Google Doodle celebrated the kayak.
Oh, okay.
The kayak was created by communities in Arctic regions. And what does the word kayak mean in Inuit? It's kind of cool.
What did you learn in the last couple weeks?
I learned about people who dip books in a body of water after finishing it as a way to remember maybe like where they were. Or they dip the edges of the book in water meaningful to the book as a way to like keep it.
Okay, I saw this too and I didn't understand what I was seeing, but it was just people dunking books in streams. And I was like, what?
So like the example that I saw was from Call Me By Your Name, and they dip it in the water that Elio
in Italy.
And so but also then as I was reading about it, it was just people who maybe traveled to a place where the book was set to dip it there to experience something kind of like an Eat, Pray, Love moment maybe.
But so, I mean, is the concept that you're going to not read it again? Or
no, the concept, you don't dip the whole book. It's just like the very edge of it.
Okay.
So it just does like that separation to make it wider. It's not ruined. Like it doesn't smear the ink or anything.
Okay. So we're not soaking the whole book.
No, like these people were just like literally taking it by the spine and like dipping it like maybe 1/4 inch.
Okay.
So that it would just be enough to be like, I was in this place, experiencing this, feeling this moment. I can think of a few books that I was reading while traveling that it would have been cool to have dipped somewhere that meant something. I was reading my
interesting way to commemorate a book.
I think it's sort of beautiful.
No, I like it. I'm kind of bothered
reading,
by the texture of the wobbly page.
See,
I would struggle with that.
The like rougher the condition equates to more love.
Oh, I see.
And so I think that that's like a badge of honor for the book. But my undergrad thesis was about the taming of the shrew and the familiarity of naming people like Catherine and Kate, and kind of how that goes back and forth for her, and how she tries to reclaim her person by not allowing people just to call her Kate if she doesn't want to be called Kate, right? Like that was my focus. And I was reading it when I was traveling through Europe on my spring break. And now looking back, like it would have been very cool to have like dipped that in
the waters of the Avon,
the Cinque Terre, or like just like kind of reading this book that was telling me something, or a play in this case. It was telling me a lot about actually what I thought of myself. I'm also someone, as you've heard on this podcast, that if we are near a body of water, I have to get in it. My feet have to be in it. I have made Chelsea pull over on the side of a wicked mountain road in Montana to dip my feet in that water. I forced her in the water in Yellowstone.
I was going to say, don't you even have an episode recorded where our feet were dangling in the water?
And the Grand Tetons. I forced you in the water at the Puget Sound. This is a way in which I somehow experience the world.
You got a connection to water. I like it.
I definitely do. And so I think that that's probably why this struck me. I don't know what I learned about it, but I learned that people do it. And I learned that I might share something with these people that it would make me appreciate looking at a book and being like, that was Yellowstone, or that was the Jenny Lake, or that was the Puget Sound, or I like that thought. If somebody hands me a book that's like beaten up, I'm way more interested in it. Because like, where have you been? What did you do?
Mm-hmm. You were worth carrying around the world.
You have a story worth telling, right? You have, so I don't know, I'm being romantic about books at the moment. All right, so what did you learn?
Okay, well, this is going to be a startling turn of events, but
no,
this week...
People expect exactly this out of us.
No, but they expect it out of you, not out of me. I'm bringing the sports factoids this week.
Oh, man.
That's usually your job.
Dang it, I have to come up with something quick.
I saw a video of Sue Bird being interviewed. It was a Bloomberg interview. She was talking about the business of professional women's sports.
She was just put in the Hall of Fame as well.
She was talking about, and this is the term that I learned, pink and shrink.
Mm-hmm.
Referring to sports merchandisers deciding that in order to sell to women, they just turn clothing pink and shrink it. And Sue was like, hey, maybe not everybody wants that.
Mm-hmm.
She brought up the example of the Everyone Watches Women's Sports shirts, which you and I both own, by the way.
Which is one of my favorite shirts.
Yes. And she was like, this is a great counterexample highlighting how to do this sort of thing better, because there is a market for women's sports and women's sports merchandise. You just have to know how to appeal to the people buying those products. And it's not by pinking it and shrinking it, as it turns out, in every case. Like, some people like that, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, her point was like, for so long, the argument against, for example, televising major women's sporting events has been like, oh, there's no market for it. And she's like, no, there is a market for it. You just don't know how to tap that market. You're not doing your job correctly. And then you're assuming that therefore there is no way to sell this product. Mm-hmm. But there absolutely is. And there always has been. And people are finally waking up to that fact. So.
Yeah. I mean, we just watched this in real time. Most people in the world have somehow consumed media about the Mike Tyson and Jake Paul fight, and we watched it with some friends, and I mean, the fight of the night was women.
Yes, that's true.
And that's what everything I've read about that whole night of fights was that it was the women that had the best fight of the night.
The sport in that sporting event was in the women's fights, I think.
People tuned in because they want to see Iron Mike and stuff like that, but when everybody's actual takeaway was that the previous fight was the fight of the night and it was two women, like, that's exactly what Sue Bird's getting at. That's exactly what all of us who've been championing women's sports and growing up in it in the 90s and stuff, like, that's what it's all about. So
it's annoying to feel like you have to keep proving yourself over and over again.
Yeah, but I mean, then you wouldn't have, Billie Jean King and some of this stuff. Like, those are the people who did it and who keep doing it, so it's cool. I'm happy to see it. If I had to describe the last 5 years in women's sports, it's been that people recognize it as they witness it. And I think that before that, they weren't. Good for these women for stirring it up.
All right. Any final thoughts, parting shots?
I think I've had enough.
I feel it's really important to keep fighting the good fight on behalf of curiosity and learning and making sure that there are places and times for people to learn and be exposed to new things.
Mm-hmm.
Just stick together and find some hope and resilience in your friends and peers and educators around you. Thanks for hanging in with us, and we'll figure it out together.
See you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye. Hey listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1. We're your co-hosts. I'm Chelsea Adams.
And I'm Katie Day. Find our show notes, archives, and resources, sign up for our newsletter, or get in touch with us via the contact form at 16to1.com, all spelled out.
We are so grateful for our listener support. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the show and telling your friends or colleagues about it.
The show is edited and produced by you, Chelsea Adams, and you're also responsible for our show's music.
And you, Katie Day, serve as lead researcher and social media manager.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show.
Feet are the books of life. A quote.
Put it on my next shirt.
By Katie.